Hey YouTube, let's take a look at some various injuries that typically happen to humans on a recreational and occupational level. This will kind of give us a little insight of what we could be facing on an individual level if we're out surviving for a more long-term level. And so this is something that we have to be aware of and maybe figure out ways to get around this, because injuries decrease our abilities to overcome and adapt. And if we don't have our full capabilities, then our chances of survival decreases. So let's begin with the sporting world, sport injuries. What are more prevalent? So basically it says that there are ankle sprains and groin pulls, hamstrings, and shin splints are up there pretty good. But a big one, and this is possibly most arguably the biggest one, is knee injuries. Maybe not as severe as an ACL tear, but it's definitely in the mix there. It says about 55% of all sport injuries, roughly, are knee injuries. That's pretty high. They're also in the mix. We have tennis elbows, hip flexor strain, concussions, sciatica, bulging disc, back strain, especially in the lower lumbar region. I read a lot about a lot of back problems with athletes. Shoulder injuries, and just generally speaking, pulled muscles. And I think that's going to probably be a really big one for individuals that are out in a survival situation. You may be cutting wood for hours and hours at a time, and you may not be used to doing that. So I think a lot of people are going to be overusing their body in terms of what their body is actually able to do or sustain. Now, on a different statistic, this is a global statistic, which I thought was really interesting. It says that 9% of all deaths are from injuries. 9% are from injuries. So that's kind of a little crazy. Now, in all fairness, not every part of the world has very good medical care and hospitals and things like that. So I'm not sure how much that influences the number, but it's still a pretty big chunk of people globally that die from injuries. Now let's switch tables here and look at the numbers and stats, I guess, in terms of occupational injuries. So the body parts that it cites that are the most susceptible to occupational injuries are going to be the spine, the hands, the head, the lungs, the eyes, the skeleton, and the skin. So just think about that. Those are obvious places where there's a lot of contact with the environment. Now, it does say that occupationally, that trips and slips and falls and that kind of thing, very common, simple injuries like that. Just not watching where you're going, or, there's a raised level and you trip and fall. This accounts for a lot of problems, massive amounts of money spent from manufacturing companies and various different types of businesses. And so those kind of simple injuries account for 20 to 40% of injuries. That's a big range, but 20 to 40%, I guess, depends on how you categorize each injury. But that's a lot, It says that back injuries are pretty much cited as probably the number one if you had a single type of injury that was specific. And that says as much as 25% of people have occupational injuries that involve back injuries. And this is kind of mostly due because of the repetitive nature going back. And so we see a lot of that it seems like besides the accidents, the repetitive types of activities and jobs are going to be right there as a very high prevalence type of reasoning of why we have problems. Now, we're talking about other different types of occupations, and let's go ahead and specifically talk about those that are the most dangerous. Basically, the most dangerous occupations, according to the literature that I've read, says that farming, fishing, and when we mean fishing, we're talking about commercial fishing on big, vessels out in the deep blue water. Farming, fishing, forestry, and I would imagine forestry in the sense that you're fighting fires and or taking trees down, clearing areas. I mean, you're probably dealing with a lot of power tools and things like that. Construction, which is very obvious. In fact, construction is pretty far up there. It's really freaking dangerous, especially if you look at your age. As the older you get, the more dangerous it is to work in construction. And then, of course, manufacturing, as we can imagine. Now, the thing is that these types of works, specifically the literature says, increases your rates of injury for the spine, the hand, and the wrist, more so than any other injury. So what can we take from all this? The takeaway here today is real simple. The more that you can minimize injury in any fashion, the more that you're going to be able to retain your capability overall. And so instead of, let's say, for example, you're in a survival situation and it's really cold out and you need a lot of firewood, as we can imagine, it's probably better to break up making firewood, maybe getting the axe out and breaking it up, maybe doing 20 or 30 minutes of splitting wood. Take a break, 10 for 20 minutes, maybe even take an hour break, and then come back and do another 20 to 30 minutes of splitting wood. And even if you have to do that 5 or 6 times, it's better for your body to have a little bit of a rest in between, and even to allow yourself to stretch out a little bit, than to just sit there for 2 to 3 hours straight splitting wood. And because obviously the repetition can get to you, you can pull muscles, just the strain on your wrists and maybe your elbows and shoulders, and you could pull a muscle. I mean, I'm not sure about you, but I've actually strained myself to the point cutting wood and even chopping trees that I've actually pulled chest muscles and all kinds of muscles, man. And that's when I was younger. So I can only imagine now that I'm older how I don't think I last very long. So that's just the facts. So hopefully this gives us a little bit more of a parameter of the things to look for. A lot of these are common sense, I mean, the back is a big problem, the knee's a big problem, and overall just strain our muscles. So we just got to take care of ourselves the best as possible, and possibly even have a few plans of how to overcome these things if we actually run into one of these injuries, even by accident. Because that's something that does come across here, is that not everything here is just done by repetition or overuse. There are sometimes accidents that cause the injuries, obviously. Just like in a short-term survival situation, the most clearly cited issue that people have is basically just tripping and falling, in the woods, and that injury leads to them not being mobile, and then that leads them into being exposed to the environment, and through excessive exposure they perish. And so it's pretty amazing how something so simple as a trip and fall can lead to your death. But we see this especially with the elderly, the geriatric populations. You see people all the time. I even have family members that have gone through this. Unfortunately, they trip and fall, or they just fall and they break a hip, and then they have such a trauma from that that they die. And it can take a while. It can take a long time for their body just breaks down. It's very, very sad. So let's go ahead and always be safe. Wear safety glasses, wear gloves when you can, thick pants if you're chopping wood, or if you're using a chainsaw. They have all kinds of various protective bibs and things to kind of create a little bit more of a barrier in case that thing gets loose. There's a lot of things that we can be very proactive in terms of our safety. Hope everyone's well and safe. You guys take care.